The package arrived on a Tuesday morning, unmarked except for my name scrawled in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single photograph of my ex-husband David shaking hands with a man in military fatigues, and beneath it, one line that made my blood freeze. Your uncle knew what David really did overseas. I thought my divorce was over. I thought the inheritance from Uncle Bob would finally give me the fresh start I desperately needed. I had no idea that David's lawsuit wasn't just about money. It was about silencing the one person who could expose a secret that went all the way to the Pentagon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain hammered against my apartment windows like an accusation, each drop echoing the anxiety that had been building in my chest for weeks. I stood in my small Portland loft, holding the legal papers that had arrived that morning, reading the same impossible words over and over. David Chen versus Sarah Mitchell. Petition for asset recovery and inheritance dispute. The man I'd divorced 2 years ago, the man who'd walked away with half of everything we'd built together, was now coming for the one thing that was purely mine. Uncle Bob had been dead for 6 months, and his will had been crystal clear. Everything went to me, his only living relative. The house in Lake Oswego, the savings account, even his old Buick, that smelled like pipe tobacco and memories. It wasn't a fortune, maybe $300,000 total, but it represented something David had never been able to touch during our marriage: independence. My uncle had always been careful to keep his assets separate, a retired defense contractor who trusted banks more than family promises. The petition claimed that I had unduly influenced my uncle during his final months, that the will was signed under suspicious circumstances, and that as my former spouse, David had a legitimate claim to assets acquired through marital connections. It was legal garbage, but it was garbage with enough technical language to tie up my inheritance in court for months, maybe years. The kind of strategy David excelled at, wearing down his opponents until they surrendered, just to make the pain stop. I sank into my second-hand couch, the papers trembling in my hands. The irony wasn't lost on me. David had been the one to suggest the divorce, had been eager to divide everything quickly and cleanly. He'd even waived his right to spousal support, claiming he wanted a fresh start with Amanda, his secretary-turned-girlfriend-turned-wife. Now, 6 months after Uncle Bob's death, he'd discovered his moral obligation to contest an inheritance he'd never known existed. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica Rodriguez, my former friend who now worked as a paralegal at David's law firm. We'd maintained a careful friendship despite the awkwardness of her position, but her message was unlike anything she'd sent before. We need to talk. Tonight. Blue Mountain Cafe. Come alone. The formality of it made my stomach clench. Jessica and I had shared countless conversations over coffee, but she'd never summoned me like this. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived, just a few students hunched over laptops and the barista wiping down tables with mechanical precision. Jessica sat in the corner booth, her usually perfect makeup smudged around her eyes. She looked like she'd been crying, or hadn't slept, or both. When she saw me, she glanced toward the windows as if checking for watchers. "This lawsuit isn't what you think it is," she said before I could even sit down. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "David's not after your money. He's after something your uncle had, something he thinks you inherited along with everything else." I slid into the booth across from her, my heart rate climbing. "What are you talking about?" Jessica pulled out her phone and showed me a photo she'd taken of a document on David's desk. The image was blurry, but I could make out a letterhead: Pacific Defense Systems, Uncle Bob's old employer. Below that, a list of names and what looked like coordinates. He's been obsessed with this for weeks. He keeps talking about loose ends and, quote, operational security. "Sarah, I think your uncle was involved in something classified, and David thinks you have proof of it." The memory hit me like a physical blow. 2 weeks after Uncle Bob's funeral, I'd been cleaning out his house when I found a safe hidden behind a false panel in his basement office. Inside were documents I didn't understand, photographs of military installations, and a letter addressed to me with instructions to keep this safe until the right moment. I'd been so overwhelmed by grief and the practical demands of settling his estate that I'd packed everything into a storage unit without really examining it. "What kind of classified work?" I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer. Jessica's eyes darted around the cafe again. "The kind that involves military contracts overseas. The kind that leaves people dead if they talk about it. Sarah, I think David was involved too. Some of the documents on his desk have his name on them, from years before you two even met." My ex-husband had always been vague about his early consulting work, claiming it was boring tech stuff for various government agencies. He'd met me 3 years after returning from what he'd described as a business development trip to Afghanistan, where he'd supposedly been setting up communications infrastructure for private contractors. I'd never questioned it deeply. David was good at making people feel foolish for asking too many questions. "There's something else," Jessica continued, sliding a flash drive across the table. "I copied some files from his computer. I don't know what they all mean, but they're bank records, payment authorizations, and a lot of communication with someone called Falcon. Sarah, the amounts we're talking about aren't consultation fees. They're the kind of money that buys silence." I stared at the flash drive, feeling the weight of my uncle's secret pressing down on me. Uncle Bob had served his country for 20 years, had earned medals and commendations, had been the kind of man who stood when the flag passed by. If he'd kept classified documents, there had to be a reason. If David was desperate enough to sue me for an inheritance he'd previously ignored, there had to be something worth hiding. The rain continued its assault on the cafe windows, as Jessica and I sat in the kind of silence that precedes life-changing decisions. I thought about my uncle's last words to me, spoken from his hospital bed with the clarity that sometimes comes just before the end. "The truth has a way of surfacing, Sarah. Just make sure you're ready when it does." I picked up the flash drive and slipped it into my pocket. Whatever David was hiding, whatever my uncle had discovered, I was about to become the keeper of secrets I didn't understand. But as I walked out into the Portland rain, one thing was perfectly clear. This lawsuit wasn't about money. It was about power and truth, and the dangerous space where the two collided. The next morning, I would drive to that storage unit and finally examine what Uncle Bob had left me. I would discover that some inheritances come with a price higher than money, and some secrets are worth dying for. The storage facility looked like a concrete fortress in the gray morning light, its rows of metal doors stretching out like tombstones in some industrial cemetery. Unit 247 sat at the end of the third row, secured with the combination lock Uncle Bob had given me months before his death. My hands shook as I spun the numbers, the same digits as his old military service number, something he'd made me memorize during one of our last conversations. Inside, cardboard boxes were stacked with military precision, each labeled in Uncle Bob's careful handwriting. Tax records, 2015 to 2020. Medical files. Personal correspondence. But it was the unmarked metal filing cabinet in the back corner that drew my attention, the one I'd moved here, without opening, after finding it in his basement office. The key hung on a chain around my neck, a final gift he'd pressed into my palm during his last hospital stay. The first drawer contained what looked like standard military documents at first glance. Commendation letters, deployment orders, performance evaluations spanning Uncle Bob's 20-year career. But as I dug deeper, the papers became more unusual. There were contracts with Pacific Defense Systems that weren't in his regular personnel file, assignments to locations that didn't match his official service record, and payment authorizations for amounts that seemed excessive for a communications specialist. The second drawer held photographs, hundreds of them, documenting construction projects in what appeared to be Afghanistan and Iraq, military bases, communication towers, and infrastructure that looked too sophisticated for the routine installations Uncle Bob had supposedly worked on. In several photos, I recognized the landscape from news reports about high-security military facilities. These weren't civilian projects. They were classified installations, and Uncle Bob had been documenting their construction with the methodical attention of someone building a case. But it was the third drawer that made my blood run cold. Financial records showing payments from Pacific Defense Systems to a network of shell companies, with final destinations that traced back to private accounts in the Cayman Islands. The amounts were staggering. Millions of dollars flowing through what appeared to be legitimate defense contracts, but ending up in offshore accounts controlled by individuals whose names I didn't recognize. Except for one name that appeared repeatedly as a payment recipient, David Chen Consulting LLC. My ex-husband's company, receiving regular payments of $50,000 monthly for strategic advisory services dating back 7 years. The payments had started 2 years before I'd even met David, and they'd continued throughout our entire marriage without my knowledge. According to the bank routing information, the money was being transferred to accounts in Switzerland and Luxembourg, classic tax haven destinations for people trying to hide substantial income. I sat back on my heels, trying to process what I was seeing. David had been receiving what amounted to hush money for years, payments disguised as consulting fees, but clearly intended to ensure his silence about something he'd witnessed or participated in during his overseas work. Uncle Bob had somehow discovered this financial trail and had been documenting it with the patience of a man who understood the importance of building an airtight case. The fourth drawer contained Uncle Bob's insurance policy, the evidence that would make his documentation meaningful. Audio recordings, dozens of them, stored on small digital devices and labeled with dates and locations. I plugged the first one into my laptop, and Uncle Bob's voice filled the storage unit, clear and determined despite the poor audio quality. September 15, 2019. Meeting with Jonathan Marsh, Pacific Defense Systems Project Coordinator. Location, Kandahar Forward Operating Base. There was a pause. Then other voices joined the conversation. Men discussing payment schedules, discussing the need to manage information flow, and most chillingly, discussing the elimination of potential security risks who might compromise their operation. The recordings painted a picture of systematic corruption within Pacific Defense Systems, a company that had been awarded billions in government contracts to provide communications infrastructure for military installations overseas. Instead of delivering the cutting-edge security systems they'd promised, they'd been installing equipment with built-in vulnerabilities, backdoors that could be exploited by hostile forces. The inferior equipment had resulted in communication failures that had cost American lives, but Pacific Defense Systems had covered up their negligence by bribing officials and silencing witnesses. David's voice appeared on a recording dated 3. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Months before our wedding, his tone casual as he discussed maintaining operational security and ensuring that irregularities in the system architecture remain undetected. He was laughing as he described the, quote, elegant simplicity of their cover-up operation, treating the deaths of American soldiers like an accounting problem that had been successfully managed. I had to stop the recording and step outside the storage unit, gulping the cold morning air as nausea overwhelmed me. The man I'd been married to for 5 years, the man I'd shared a bed with and built a life with, had been involved in covering up the deaths of American service members for money. Every time he'd kissed me goodbye in the morning, every time he told me he loved me, he'd been carrying the weight of blood money in his pockets. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, Sarah. Some graves are better left undisturbed." The message had been sent from a burner phone, untraceable. But the timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Someone was watching me, someone who knew exactly what I was uncovering in this storage unit. I went back inside and continued searching through Uncle Bob's evidence. The final folder contained something that made my hands tremble as I read it. A complete list of American military personnel who had died due to communication failures caused by Pacific Defense Systems' compromised equipment. 37 names, 37 families who had never learned the truth about why their loved ones had died. Uncle Bob had been planning to expose the entire conspiracy, but he'd died before he could bring his evidence forward. Attached to the casualty list was a note in Uncle Bob's handwriting. "Sarah, if you're reading this, it means they got to me before I could finish what I started. These people died because of greed and cowardice. Their families deserve the truth." The audio recordings contain enough evidence to bring down Pacific Defense Systems and everyone involved in the cover-up, including your ex-husband. Use this information wisely. Trust no one except Captain James Wilson at Fort Lewis. He's been helping me investigate this from the inside. The password for the encrypted files is Phoenix Rising, Bob. Captain James Wilson. I remembered Uncle Bob mentioning him occasionally, describing him as one of the good ones, who still believed in doing the right thing regardless of the personal cost. If Uncle Bob had trusted him with this investigation, then Captain Wilson might be the only person who could help me understand the full scope of what I'd discovered. But as I packed the most crucial documents into my bag, Another thought occurred to me. David's lawsuit wasn't just about preventing me from discovering this evidence. It was about buying time for Pacific Defense Systems to cover their tracks completely. If they could tie up my inheritance in legal proceedings, they could argue that any evidence I presented had been obtained illegally, contaminated by the ongoing litigation. They could discredit me as a vindictive ex-wife trying to destroy her former husband's reputation. The sophistication of their strategy suggested that this wasn't David's plan alone. Pacific Defense Systems had the resources and connections to orchestrate a legal campaign designed to neutralize Uncle Bob's evidence before it could see daylight. They'd probably been monitoring Uncle Bob's activities before his death, waiting for the right moment to strike. His sudden decline and death from what doctors had called complications from pneumonia suddenly seemed less coincidental. I locked the storage unit and drove home in a daze, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd learned. The flash drive Jessica had given me was still in my pocket, and I wondered what additional evidence it might contain. If David had been careless enough to leave files on his office computer, there might be communications with his handlers at Pacific Defense Systems, instructions about how to manage the legal situation, or even discussions about more permanent solutions to their Sarah Mitchell problem. My apartment felt different when I returned, as if the walls themselves had been listening to my thoughts. I checked the locks twice, drew the curtains, and set up my laptop on the kitchen table where I could see anyone approaching the front door. The paranoia felt justified now. These weren't people who dealt with problems through traditional legal channels. They were people who made problems disappear entirely. As I prepared to examine Jessica's flash drive, I realized that Uncle Bob's inheritance had given me more than money or property. It had given me the power to seek justice for 37 dead soldiers and expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of defense contracting. But it had also made me a target for people who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill to protect their secrets. The next phase of this battle wouldn't be fought in courtrooms or conference rooms. It would be fought in the shadows, between people who understood that some truths were worth dying for, and others who believed that some secrets were worth killing to protect. Jessica's flash drive contained a digital labyrinth of corruption that made my head spin. Sitting at my kitchen table with multiple laptops open, I navigated through folders labeled with innocuous names like Q3 projections and client communications. But the contents revealed a sophisticated money laundering operation that dwarfed anything I'd imagined. Pacific Defense Systems hadn't just been covering up equipment failures. They'd been systematically defrauding the American government for over a decade. The financial documents showed a complex web of subsidiary companies, each designed to obscure the flow of money from Pentagon contracts into private offshore accounts. Cascade Holdings, LLC, Mountain Vista Consulting, and Aurora Technical Services were all shell companies controlled by the same group of executives, creating an illusion of competitive bidding while actually funneling contracts to the same corrupt network. The amounts involved were breathtaking. Over $2 billion in fraudulent contracts spread across 7 years. David's role in this conspiracy was larger than I'd initially understood. According to the internal communications Jessica had copied, he wasn't just receiving hush money for his silence about the equipment failures. He was actively managing the technical side of the cover-up, developing software patches and system modifications designed to hide the vulnerabilities in Pacific Defense Systems communications equipment. His company, Chen Digital Solutions, had been providing the digital tools necessary to maintain the facade that their systems were secure. One email chain from 18 months ago made me physically ill as I read it. David was corresponding with someone identified only as Mountain, discussing the neutralization of an Army communications specialist who had begun asking questions about system failures during a deployment in Syria. The specialist, Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, had been filing reports about equipment malfunctions that didn't match the official specifications. 3 weeks after the email exchange, Rodriguez had died in what military reports described as an accidental electrocution, while performing routine maintenance on a communications array. The accident report was attached to the email chain, along with David's analysis of how the incident had successfully ended the investigation into system irregularities. Reading his clinical assessment of a young soldier's death, his satisfaction with how cleanly the problem had been resolved, I realized I'd been married to a monster. Every kiss, every intimate moment, every time he'd told me he loved me while this blood was on his hands. But it was the most recent communications that sent ice through my veins. David had been in constant contact with Pacific Defense Systems executives since Uncle Bob's death, coordinating their response to what they called the Stevens situation. They knew exactly what evidence my uncle had gathered, and they'd been planning their countermeasures for months. The lawsuit wasn't their primary strategy, it was a delaying tactic while they implemented what they euphemistically called permanent solutions. An encrypted message from just 3 days ago laid out their timeline. Asset Sarah M. requires immediate containment. Legal proceedings provide 72-hour window for implementation. Falcon team standing by for deployment. Recommend proceeding with Protocol 7 upon confirmation of evidence location. The military precision of the language, the casual discussion of my elimination as an asset requiring containment, made my hands shake as I read. Protocol 7, according to a document buried deeper in the files, was their term for making someone disappear permanently while maintaining plausible deniability. Previous implementations had included the heart attack of a whistleblowing accountant in Dubai, the car accident of a journalist investigating defense contracts in Germany, and the suicide of a former Pacific Defense Systems employee who had attempted to contact federal investigators. The documentation was meticulous, clinical, and absolutely terrifying. I needed to contact Captain Wilson immediately, but first I had to secure the evidence. If something happened to me, if Pacific Defense Systems succeeded in implementing Protocol 7, someone else needed to have access to Uncle Bob's documentation. I began uploading everything to multiple encrypted cloud storage accounts, creating digital copies that would survive even if they destroyed the physical evidence. My phone rang as I was finishing the uploads, an unknown number with a Washington area code. Against my better judgment, I answered. Sarah Mitchell, a deep voice said, professionally neutral but carrying an undercurrent of authority. This is Captain James Wilson, Fort Lewis. I believe your uncle mentioned my name to you. Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I almost sobbed. Captain Wilson, yes. Uncle Bob said you were helping him investigate Pacific Defense Systems. I found his evidence, and I think they're planning to kill me. There was a pause, then Wilson's voice returned with increased urgency. Where are you right now? Are you somewhere secure? I'm in my apartment in Portland, but I don't think anywhere is secure. They've been monitoring my movements, and according to their communications, they have something called a Falcon team ready to deploy. Wilson's sharp intake of breath was audible. Falcon team. Christ, Sarah, those aren't corporate security contractors. Those are military assets, special operations personnel who've been compromised by Pacific Defense Systems. If they're deploying Falcon team, you have maybe hours before they move on you. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in as the reality of my situation crystallized. What do I do? I have all of Uncle Bob's evidence, audio recordings, financial documents, everything we need to expose them. But if I'm dead— Listen carefully, Wilson interrupted. I'm going to give you an address. It's a safe house maintained by people who've been investigating this conspiracy from inside the military. Can you get there within the next 2 hours? I grabbed a pen and wrote down the address he provided. It was in a residential neighborhood in southeast Portland, about 20 minutes from my apartment. What about the evidence? Should I bring everything? Bring copies, but make sure the originals are secured somewhere else. These people have resources you can't imagine, Sarah. They've been operating with impunity for years. Because they have assets inside the Pentagon, inside the Justice Department, inside agencies you've never heard of. The only reason we've been able to investigate them at all is because we've stayed completely off the official radar. As Wilson spoke, I began transferring the most critical files to a secure external drive while leaving copies on my laptop. Captain, how many people are we talking about? How deep does this conspiracy go? Deep enough that your uncle's investigation threatened to bring down a network worth billions of dollars annually. Pacific Defense Systems isn't just one company, Sarah. It's the visible tip of a military-industrial complex that's been systematically compromising American national security for profit. The equipment failures aren't bugs in their systems, they're features. They're selling access to American military communications to the highest bidders. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Uncle Bob hadn't just uncovered a cover-up of equipment failures, he'd discovered a treasonous conspiracy that was actively selling American military secrets to foreign powers. No wonder they were willing to kill to protect it. No wonder they had access to special operations assets willing to implement Protocol 7 against American citizens. There's something else you need to know, Wilson continued. Your uncle didn't die from pneumonia complications. We have evidence that he was poisoned, a slow-acting compound that mimics the symptoms of respiratory failure. They've been perfecting these methods for years, eliminating anyone who gets too close to the truth. I closed my eyes, grief and rage warring in my chest. Uncle Bob had been murdered for trying to seek justice for dead soldiers, killed by the same people who'd caused those deaths in the first place. How do we stop them, Captain? How do we make sure these people face justice? We're going to need federal authorities who aren't compromised, and that's going to require very careful coordination. The FBI has a task force investigating defense contractor fraud, but we don't know how deep Pacific Defense Systems penetration goes into federal law enforcement. We need to approach this through channels they can't monitor or influence. I finished packing the essential documents and began gathering the few personal items I could carry. My normal life was over. I understood that now. Whether I survived this or not, Sarah Mitchell, the marketing coordinator living quietly in Portland, was gone forever. I was now Sarah Mitchell, the keeper of secrets that powerful people would kill to protect. Captain, there's a woman named Jessica Rodriguez who helped me get some of this information. She works as a paralegal at my ex-husband's law firm, but she's been feeding me intelligence about their plans. Is she in danger too? Wilson's silence stretched long enough to confirm my fears. If they know she's been helping you, then yes, she's in extreme danger. Do you have a way to contact her securely? I thought about Jessica's brave decision to steal files from David's computer, her willingness to risk everything to help me uncover the truth. She'd trusted me with evidence that could destroy her career and possibly her life, and now that trust might get her killed. I can reach her, but if I warn her, won't that confirm their suspicions? At this point, Sarah, their suspicions are irrelevant. They're moving to clean up all potential witnesses. Jessica's survival depends on getting her out of their reach before they implement Protocol 7 on her too. As I prepared to leave my apartment for what might be the last time, I realized that Uncle Bob's inheritance had given me more than evidence of corruption. It had given me the responsibility to seek justice for everyone who'd been harmed by this conspiracy. The 37 dead soldiers, the murdered whistleblowers, Uncle Bob himself, and now potentially Jessica. The weight of their deaths pressed down on me as I locked my door and walked toward an uncertain future. The safe house address Wilson had given me represented either salvation or a trap, but staying in my apartment guaranteed death. As I drove through Portland's familiar streets, I understood that I was crossing a threshold from which there could be no return. The comfortable illusions of civilian life were behind me now. Ahead lay a shadow war between truth and power, between justice and corruption, and I was about to become a combatant whether I was ready or not. The house on Southeast Belmont looked like every other craftsman bungalow in the neighborhood, complete with a rain-soaked garden and a rusted mailbox that read Thompson. But as I approached the front door, I noticed details that marked it as something more than a typical Portland residence. Security cameras disguised as decorative elements, windows with reinforced frames, and a door that looked solid enough to stop a battering ram. When I knocked using the sequence Wilson had specified, 3 short, 2 long, 1 short, the man who answered looked like he could have stepped out of a recruitment poster for elite military units. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, not a question but a confirmation. "I'm Sergeant Major Ryan Torres. Captain Wilson sent word you were coming." His handshake was firm but brief, his eyes constantly scanning the street behind me. "We need to get you inside immediately. There's been a development." The interior of the house had been converted into a sophisticated command center. Multiple computer workstations lined the walls, their screens displaying satellite imagery, communications intercepts, and what appeared to be real-time surveillance feeds from locations I didn't recognize. 3 other people worked at various stations, all with the focused intensity of military professionals engaged in active operations. The domestic facade outside concealed a nerve center for what was clearly a significant intelligence operation. "Captain Wilson is on his way," Torres explained, leading me to a secure room in the back of the house. "But we've intercepted communications indicating that Pacific Defense Systems has accelerated their timeline. They're moving against you tonight, not in 72 hours as originally planned." The secure room was lined with materials that I assumed were designed to prevent electronic surveillance, and Torres closed the door with the solid thunk of a bank vault. "Before we proceed, I need to verify your identity and confirm that you have the evidence Captain Wilson described." His demeanor was professional but cautious, the wariness of someone who'd learned that trust could be a fatal mistake. I handed him the external drive containing copies of Uncle Bob's files and watched as he connected it to a specialized computer that appeared to be isolated from any networks. As he scrolled through the documents, his expression grew increasingly grim. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, stopping at one of the audio recordings. "Your uncle documented everything. Names, dates, financial transactions, even recorded conversations with Pacific Defense Systems executives discussing specific operations." "Torres," one of the operators called from the main room, "we're getting chatter about a 3-vehicle convoy moving towards southeast Portland. Call signs match the Falcon team configuration." My blood turned to ice. "They're coming here? How did they find this location?" Torres was already moving, his military training evident in the efficiency of his actions. "We have to assume they've been tracking you since you left your apartment. Standard protocol for high-value elimination targets." He handed me a communications headset and a device that looked like a modified smartphone. "This will keep you connected to our network. If we get separated, use the emergency beacon function to signal for extraction." The next few minutes passed in a blur of controlled chaos. The team began shutting down non-essential equipment while maintaining surveillance feeds and communication links. Torres explained that the safe house was designed for exactly this scenario, with multiple escape routes and defensive positions that could buy time for evacuation or reinforcements to arrive. "The problem," he said, as we prepared to move to a more secure location within the house, "is that Falcon Team isn't just any special operations unit. These are soldiers who've been recruited and corrupted by Pacific Defense Systems, given access to military-grade equipment and intelligence resources. They know how we operate, because they used to be us." Through the surveillance monitors, we watched as 3 black SUVs with tinted windows positioned themselves around the neighborhood. The vehicles moved with tactical precision, blocking potential escape routes while maintaining positions that would allow rapid deployment of personnel. These weren't corporate security contractors or local hired muscle. These were professionals conducting a military operation on American soil. Captain Wilson's voice crackled through the communication system. "Torres, I'm 15 minutes out with additional support. Can you hold position until then?" "Negative, sir," Torres replied, watching as figures in tactical gear began emerging from the vehicles. "We're looking at immediate breach. Initiating evacuation protocol Alpha." The basement of the safe house contained what Torres described as a, quote, "hard site," a reinforced bunker designed to withstand assault while providing secure communication with outside authorities. As we descended, I could hear the distinctive sound of flashbang grenades detonating upstairs, followed by the controlled movements of a professional assault team, clearing the house room by room. "They're not trying to take prisoners," Torres observed, monitoring the tactical frequencies the assault team was using. "This is a search and destroy mission. They're here to eliminate witnesses and recover evidence." In the bunker, Torres activated what he called the dead man switch, a system designed to automatically transmit all stored intelligence to multiple federal agencies if the safe house was compromised. "If they kill us," he explained, "at least the evidence will survive to reach people who can act on it." But as we waited in the underground chamber, Listening to the assault team systematically destroying everything above us, my phone rang with a call that changed everything. The caller ID showed Jessica's number, but when I answered, the voice that spoke was unmistakably David's. "Hello, Sarah," my ex-husband said, his tone carrying the satisfied confidence of someone who believed they held all the advantages. "I think it's time we had a conversation about your uncle's legacy and what you think you're going to do with it." Torres immediately began tracing the call while I kept David talking. "Where's Jessica?" I demanded. "If you've heard her, Jessica is experiencing some temporary hospitality at one of our secure facilities," David interrupted. "Her well-being depends entirely on your cooperation over the next few hours. I think you'll find our terms quite reasonable." The surveillance feed from upstairs showed that the assault team had finished their systematic destruction and was now setting up equipment that Torres identified as military-grade explosives. They weren't just planning to eliminate witnesses, they were preparing to destroy all evidence that the safe house had ever existed. "What do you want, David?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "All of your uncle's documentation, every copy, every backup, every file you've created or shared. In exchange, Jessica lives, and you get to walk away from this situation with a generous settlement that will ensure your comfortable retirement in a location where discretion is valued." Torres shook his head vigorously, pointing to intelligence on his screen showing Jessica's location. She was being held at a warehouse facility controlled by Pacific Defense Systems, but thermal imaging suggested she was alive and unharmed. However, the same intelligence showed that the facility was heavily guarded and prepared for siege conditions. "I need proof that Jessica is alive," I said, buying time while Torres coordinated with Captain Wilson's approaching team. "Of course," David replied smoothly. A moment later, Jessica's voice came through the phone, frightened but defiant. "Sarah, don't give them anything. They killed your uncle, and they'll kill us both regardless of what you do. The evidence is the only thing keeping us alive." David's voice returned immediately. "You have 30 minutes to decide, Sarah. Bring the evidence to the warehouse district, Building 47 on Northwest Industrial, and come alone. Any deviation from these instructions, any attempt to involve additional parties, and Jessica's situation becomes permanently resolved." The line went dead, leaving us in the underground bunker with the sound of explosives being prepared above us and 30 minutes to devise a plan that could save Jessica while ensuring that Uncle Bob's evidence reached the right authorities. Torres was already coordinating a multi-pronged response with Captain Wilson's team. "We can't give them the evidence, but we can't abandon Jessica either. We're going to have to split our resources, create multiple simultaneous operations that will overwhelm their ability to respond effectively." "What kind of operations?" I asked, though I suspected the answer would involve significant personal risk. "You're going to keep that meeting with your ex-husband," Torres explained. "But you're going to be equipped with surveillance technology that will document everything they say and do. Meanwhile, Captain Wilson's team will be conducting a simultaneous assault on the warehouse to extract Jessica. If we time it correctly, we can rescue her while gathering additional evidence of their criminal conspiracy." The plan was audacious and dangerous, requiring precise coordination and a significant amount of luck. But as the explosive charges above us detonated and the ceiling of our bunker shook with the force of the blast, I realized that audacious and dangerous had become our only options. Torres handed me a vest that looked like body armor but was actually sophisticated recording and tracking equipment. "Every word of your conversation with David will be transmitted to federal authorities in real time. Even if they kill you, we'll have documentation of their conspiracy that can't be suppressed or discredited." As we prepared to leave the bunker through an escape tunnel that emerged 3 blocks away, I thought about the path that had brought me to this moment. A simple inheritance dispute had evolved into a battle for national security, with the lives of countless service members hanging in the balance. Uncle Bob's evidence wasn't just about seeking justice for past crimes. It was about preventing future betrayals that could cost American lives. The warehouse district loomed ahead like a battleground, and I was about to walk into the heart of enemy territory carrying evidence that could either save the country or get me killed. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had allies who understood the stakes and were willing to fight for the truth regardless of the personal cost. Building 47 stood like a concrete monument to industrial decay, its windows dark except for a single light on the third floor that served as a beacon for my approach. The recording equipment Torres had given me felt heavy against my chest, a constant reminder that every word spoken in the next hour would either vindicate Uncle Bob's sacrifice or document my own execution. The weight of the external drive in my jacket pocket contained enough evidence to bring down Pacific Defense Systems, but it also represented Jessica's only chance of survival. My hands trembled as I approached the designated entrance, a steel door marked only by rust stains and the number 47 painted in fading white letters. The industrial district was eerily quiet at 11 p.m., the kind of desolate landscape where screams would go unheard and bodies could disappear without anyone asking questions. As I raised my hand to knock, the door opened automatically, revealing a dimly lit corridor that stretched deeper into the building's interior. David stood at the far end of the hallway, looking nothing like the man I'd once loved. Gone was the casual confidence and easy charm that had attracted me years ago. In its place was the cold calculation of someone who'd spent too many years making morally compromising decisions for money. He wore tactical gear similar to the assault team that had destroyed the safe house, and his stance suggested military training I'd never known he possessed. "Sarah," he said, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I'm glad you decided to be reasonable about this situation. It really is the best outcome for everyone involved." "Where's Jessica?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. The recording equipment was already transmitting our conversation to Captain Wilson's team, documenting David's admission of kidnapping a federal witness. "She's safe," David replied, gesturing for me to follow him deeper into the warehouse. "For now. Her continued safety depends on your full cooperation and the complete surrender of your uncle's documentation." As we walked through the warehouse, I could see that Pacific Defense Systems had converted the space into a sophisticated operational center. Military-grade communication equipment lined the walls, multiple computer workstations displayed surveillance feeds from locations around the world, and weapons storage areas contained enough firepower to outfit a small army. This wasn't just a meeting location, it was a command center for treasonous activities on American soil. "Impressive, isn't it?" David said, noticing my examination of the facility. "Pacific Defense Systems has been building this network for 15 years, establishing operational capabilities that rival many national intelligence services. We've proven that patriotism is just another commodity that can be bought and sold to the highest bidder." 3 men in tactical gear emerged from the shadows as we entered the main warehouse floor, their weapons trained on me with professional precision. These weren't hired mercenaries or corporate security contractors. Their bearing and equipment marked them as special operations personnel, the same Falcon team that had assaulted the safe house. Seeing them up close, I recognized the hollow look in their eyes that comes from crossing lines that can never be uncrossed. "The evidence, Sarah," David said, extending his hand. "All of it. Every digital copy, every audio recording, every document your uncle compiled during his misguided investigation." I pulled the external drive from my pocket, but didn't hand it over immediately. "I want to see Jessica first. I want confirmation that she's alive and unharmed." David nodded to one of the Falcon team members, who activated a wall-mounted monitor. The screen flickered to life, showing Jessica bound to a chair in what appeared to be a storage room elsewhere in the building. She looked frightened but uninjured, and when she saw the camera activate, she mouthed words I couldn't hear but could clearly understand. "Don't trust them." "As you can see, she's perfectly fine," David said. "But her continued well-being depends on your immediate compliance. No more delays, no more negotiations." I held up the drive, but kept it just out of his reach. "Before I give you this, I want to understand something. You were my husband for 5 years. We shared a bed, shared our lives, planned a future together. How do you live with yourself knowing that you've caused the deaths of American soldiers for money?" David's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes that might have been the last remnant of the man I'd once known. "You think this is about money, Sarah? You think we're just greedy contractors padding our profits at the expense of military effectiveness?" He gestured toward the sophisticated equipment surrounding us. This operation represents the future of American national security. The old model of blind patriotism and absolute loyalty to government institutions is obsolete. We're creating a new paradigm where information and strategic advantages go to those intelligent enough to understand their true value. You're selling American military secrets to foreign governments, I said, my voice rising with anger. You're getting American soldiers killed to line your own pockets. There's no patriotic justification for treason. Treason? David laughed, the sound echoing off the warehouse walls. Sarah, we're not selling secrets to enemies of America. We're selling them to allies who are willing to pay fair market value for strategic intelligence. The Chinese, the Russians, even the Israelis understand that information has value. Why should American taxpayers be the only ones benefiting from intelligence gathered with American resources? The casual way he discussed selling state secrets to hostile foreign powers made my blood run cold. This wasn't just corruption or war profiteering. It was systematic betrayal of everything Uncle Bob had spent his life defending. The recording equipment was capturing every word of David's confession, documenting evidence that would be impossible to explain away or suppress. The soldiers who died because of faulty communications equipment, I pressed, needing to get his full admission on record. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the 37 names on Uncle Bob's list. How do you justify their deaths? David's facade of reasonableness finally cracked, revealing the cold calculation underneath. Casualties are inevitable in any military operation, Sarah. The fact that some of those casualties resulted from equipment we modified to serve dual purposes doesn't change the strategic value of what we accomplished. Rodriguez was asking too many questions, getting too close to operational security. His elimination was a necessary business decision. One of the Falcon team members stepped forward, his weapon trained directly on my chest. Enough talking, he said. Give us the drive, or we start making this situation permanently resolved. But before I could respond, the warehouse erupted in chaos. Explosions thundered from multiple directions as Captain Wilson's team executed their coordinated assault, breaching the building from 3 different entry points simultaneously. Flashbang grenades detonated throughout the facility, temporarily blinding and disorienting the Falcon team members while military smoke obscured the warehouse floor. "Contact front!" one of the Falcon operators shouted, immediately returning fire toward the breaching teams. The warehouse became a battleground as 2 groups of elite military personnel engaged in close-quarters combat, their muzzle flashes strobing through the artificial fog like deadly lightning. David grabbed my arm, trying to use me as a human shield while retreating toward what appeared to be a secure area in the rear of the warehouse. "You set this up," he snarled, his composure completely shattered. "You brought them here." I twisted away from his grip, diving behind a concrete support pillar as bullets shattered the air where I'd been standing. The external drive skittered across the floor, sliding toward the center of the firefight, where both sides were desperately trying to control the tactical situation. Through the smoke and chaos, I could hear Captain Wilson's voice shouting tactical commands to his team. Jessica Rodriguez is being held in the northeast storage area. Alpha Team, secure the hostage. Bravo Team, contain the Falcon operators. Charlie Team, secure all documentation and computer equipment. The battle was brief but intense. The kind of professional violence that ends quickly when one side has better intelligence and coordination. Within 10 minutes, the warehouse fell silent except for the ringing in my ears and the occasional groan from wounded Falcon team members being secured by Wilson's operators. David had been cornered in the rear of the warehouse, his hands zip-tied behind his back as he sat against a wall bleeding from a head wound. When he saw me approaching with Captain Wilson, his eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost physical. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, his voice hoarse from the smoke. "Pacific Defense Systems isn't just one company, Sarah. It's a network that reaches into every level of American defense contracting. You think stopping us here ends anything? We have operations in 30 countries, assets in every major defense contractor, and politicians in our pocket from local city councils to the United States Senate." Captain Wilson knelt down beside David, his expression grim. "Then you better start talking about those operations. because right now you're looking at charges of treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and violations of about 15 different national security statutes. Your only chance of avoiding a death sentence is full cooperation with federal investigators." But David just smiled, blood trickling down his face from the head wound. "You think I'm afraid of death, Captain? I've been planning for this contingency for years. Everything you've captured here tonight is just one operational node in a much larger network. Cut off this head, and 3 more will grow back to replace it." Jessica appeared at my side, supported by 2 of Wilson's team members but walking under her own power. Despite her ordeal, her eyes were sharp and focused, the look of someone who'd survived trauma but hadn't been broken by it. "Sarah," she said, gripping my arm, "there's something you need to know about their computer systems." While they were holding me, I heard them talking about a data purge protocol. If they activate it, every piece of evidence on their servers will be automatically destroyed. Captain Wilson immediately directed his technical team toward the computer workstations, but as they began accessing the systems, alarms started blaring throughout the warehouse. Red lights flashed from every computer terminal, and automated voices began announcing, "Data purge protocol activated. All files will be permanently deleted in 60 seconds. 60 seconds to save 15 years of evidence," one of Wilson's technicians announced grimly. "The encryption is military grade, and they've got multiple redundant deletion systems. I can maybe save 10% of the files if I prioritize the most recent communications." But I remembered something David had said during our confrontation, something about the true scope of Pacific Defense Systems operations. "Check for files labeled Phoenix Network," I called out to the technician. David mentioned operations in 30 countries. That has to be their master database. The technician's fingers flew over the keyboard as the deletion countdown continued. "Got it," he announced. "Phoenix Network database, and it's huge. Terabytes of operational data, financial records, asset lists, and communications logs. But I can only save about half of it before the purge completes." "Save what you can," Captain Wilson ordered. "Even partial intelligence on their network will give federal investigators leads to follow." As the data purge completed and the warehouse computer systems went dark, I realized that tonight's victory was only the beginning of a much larger battle. Pacific Defense Systems had revealed the existence of a corruption network that reached into the highest levels of American government and defense contracting. Uncle Bob's evidence had been validated, but it had also exposed a conspiracy so vast that bringing it to justice would require resources and coordination beyond anything we'd accomplished so far. David was loaded into an armored vehicle for transport to a federal detention facility, but his parting words to me carried the weight of a promise rather than a threat. "This isn't over, Sarah. The Phoenix Network has contingency plans for every scenario, including the capture of operational personnel. You've won a battle, but the war is just beginning." 3 weeks later, I stood in a secure briefing room at the Pentagon, surrounded by military and intelligence officials, whose rank insignia and security clearances represented the highest levels of American national security apparatus. The evidence Uncle Bob had gathered, combined with the intelligence captured during the warehouse raid, had triggered the largest counterintelligence investigation in American history. General Patricia Morrison, the Pentagon's senior officer responsible for defense contractor oversight, addressed the assembled officials with the gravity appropriate to the situation. "The Phoenix Network represents a fundamental compromise of American defense capabilities," she announced. "Based on the evidence provided by Ms. Mitchell and her uncle's investigation, we estimate that classified information worth billions of dollars has been sold to foreign intelligence services over the past 15 years. The investigation had already yielded dozens of arrests across multiple federal agencies and defense contractors. Pacific Defense Systems had been dissolved, its assets frozen, and its executives charged with treason." But as David had predicted, the network's reach extended far beyond a single company. Congressional hearings were scheduled to begin the following month, with testimony from myself and Jessica forming the cornerstone of the government's case against the conspiracy. Captain Wilson, now promoted to major for his role in exposing the Phoenix Network, handed me a sealed envelope during a break in the briefing. "This came through official channels," he explained. It's from the families of the soldiers who died because of Pacific Defense Systems' compromised equipment. They wanted you to know that your uncle's sacrifice and your courage in continuing his work has finally given them the truth they've been seeking for years. Inside the envelope were 37 letters, one from each family affected by the equipment failures that Uncle Bob had documented. Reading their words of gratitude and closure, I finally understood the true value of the inheritance my uncle had left me. It wasn't the money or property that mattered. It was the responsibility to seek justice for those who couldn't seek it for themselves. The legal proceedings would continue for years, unraveling a conspiracy that had compromised American national security at levels previously thought impossible. David and his co-conspirators would face trial for treason, with the evidence captured during the warehouse raid providing prosecutors with an airtight case for convictions. The Phoenix Network's international operations would be systematically dismantled through cooperation with allied intelligence services. But perhaps most importantly, the military families who had lost loved ones to Pacific Defense Systems' greed finally had answers about why their sons and daughters had died. Uncle Bob's meticulous documentation had given them the truth they deserved, and his sacrifice had prevented countless future betrayals of American service members. As I walked out of the Pentagon that day, I thought about the journey that had brought me from a simple inheritance dispute to the center of the largest counterintelligence operation in American history. Uncle Bob's final gift hadn't been money or property. It had been the opportunity to honor the memory of those who died serving their country, and to ensure that their sacrifice would never be forgotten or betrayed again. The Phoenix Network was finished. David and his co-conspirators would spend the rest of their lives in federal prison, and the 37 families finally had the justice they'd been denied for so long. Some inheritances come with money, others with property, but the most valuable inheritance of all is the chance to make a difference in the world, even when that chance comes with the highest possible personal cost. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.